Today we're exploring one of the darkest secrets the wasteland has buried, a mystery that's been hiding beneath the waves for over 200 years. While Vault Tech buried humanity underground and the Enclave fled to their oil rig, the United States Navy had its own contingency plan, a network of underwater installations, submarine crews that never surfaced, and genetic experiments that transformed humans into something adapted for life beneath the ocean. This is the confession of someone who discovered the truth, and it will change how you see every body of water in the Fallout universe. Let's begin. I was diving for salvage in Boston Harbor when I found it, a shape in the murk that didn't belong, a leviathan resting in the silt like some ancient sea monster waiting to wake. My radiation counter started clicking before I even got close, that familiar staccato rhythm that means something nuclear is nearby, something that still has power after all these years. The Yangtze 31, a Chinese stealth submarine, hiding there for over 200 years, its reactor still humming beneath the waves like a sleeping heart. I'd heard the stories, of course. Donnie Kowalski, that kid at the Shamrock Tap House, he swore he saw a sea monster out in the harbor. Most folks laughed it off as radiation sickness or too much rot-gut whiskey. But when I swam down there, when I saw that periscope cutting through the debris field like a metal fin, I knew Donnie wasn't crazy. I found Captain Zhao inside, or what was left of him. Ghoulification had turned his skin to leather, but his mind was still sharp, still trapped in that metal coffin with the weight of what he'd done. He told me everything during those long hours we talked. How he'd launched his missiles at the Commonwealth on October 23, 2077, how he'd followed his orders and sent nuclear fire raining down on American cities, how the submarine struck a mine trying to retreat, how the reactor leak turned his crew into monsters while he retained just enough sanity to remember every single person he'd killed. 2 centuries of guilt floating in the dark beneath Boston Harbor. But here's what kept me awake that night, what made me start digging through pre-war intelligence files in the switchboard. If one Chinese submarine could survive this long, fully operational, with a working reactor and a functional crew, what else was down there? What other vessels managed to outlast the apocalypse in the crushing darkness of the ocean floor? I found the answer in classified Defense Intelligence Agency reports buried under layers of security protocols that had been obsolete for 200 years. The Ghost Fleet. That's what American intelligence called it, a top-secret Chinese naval unit consisting of next-generation stealth submarines developed in secret at Shanxi province. The DIA didn't even know how many vessels China had built. The files talked about complex polymers, synthetic compounds, shipments that suggested macro-scale stealth research, submarines that could slip past American detection grids like shadows through water. The Yangtze 31 was just one vessel from that ghost fleet. Intelligence suggested multiple submarines had already infiltrated American waters before the war, prowling the Atlantic and Pacific like invisible predators. Station Alpha 31 and Station Bravo 19 reported sightings in November 2075. The general in charge refused to take it to the Joint Chiefs without proof. He called it ludicrous. He said there was no way China could be working on something this big without America hearing about it. He was wrong. In Point Lookout, I found another one. The SSN 37-1 Alpha, a smaller Chinese reconnaissance submarine sent to patrol hostile waters around the Maryland coast. The Americans discovered it shortly before the Great War, managed to capture the crew before they could scuttle the vessel. I read the interrogation reports at Turtle Dove Detention Camp. One surviving submariner, codename John Doe, demonstrated what the interrogators called extraordinary fortitude for a relatively low-ranking grunt. He never broke, never told them about the Ghost Fleet, never revealed how many more submarines were out there in the dark. Agent Jiang, a Chinese spy posing as a defector, tried to destroy that submarine before American analysts could reverse engineer its stealth technology. The mission parameters were clear: destroy derelict submarine SSN 371 Alpha before the Americans can recover and analyze it. Orbital intelligence confirmed the destruction, but what did they learn before it sank? What secrets did American engineers pull from that wreckage? Then there's San Francisco, and this is where the story gets really interesting. The Shi claim their ancestors crawled out of the submarine Shi Huang Ti when it ran aground after the Great War. Simple sailors, they say, just submarine crewmen who survived the apocalypse and built a new civilization from the wreckage. They stripped the submarine of its subsystems, used the metal to build the Steel Palace, salvaged the onboard supercomputer, and called it the Emperor. But I've been to San Francisco. I've seen what the Shi built. Those simple sailors developed radiation-resistant plant life. They synthesized new fuel using plant extracts and sea life. They created the most technologically sophisticated society in the wasteland, surpassing even the Brotherhood of Steel. They manufacture high-tech weapons, restore pre-war T-51 power armor to working condition, and they're nearing breakthroughs in nuclear power and space travel. Simple sailors don't do that. An advanced infiltration unit with long-term operational parameters does. Think about it. The Shi Huang Ti was a Chinese submarine that washed ashore in San Francisco shortly after the Great War. Its crew established themselves in the former Chinatown, rebuilt the devastated city with the few survivors they found, and created a highly effective intelligence network. They stay out of wasteland politics, maintain a feudal society with strict hierarchical organization, and guard their coastal waters so jealously that no salvager has explored the depths of San Francisco Bay since the bombs fell. Exactly what a deep-cover infiltration unit would do if their original mission became obsolete. Survive, adapt, gather intelligence, wait for orders that will never come. That's 3 Chinese submarines confirmed in American waters, 3 vessels from the Ghost Fleet that we know about. The intelligence reports suggested dozens more. Where are they? Resting in the silt at the bottom of the Atlantic, hiding in underwater canyons along the Pacific Shelf? Still operational, still crewed by ghoulified sailors who forgot they lost the war 200 years ago? But here's the question that really haunts me. What about American submarines? We had the largest naval fleet in the world. We had Trident missile submarines, attack subs, nuclear-powered vessels designed to survive anything short of a direct hit. The USS Interference gets a mention in military records, famous for accidentally sinking the Yus Eben Atoll with a nuclear torpedo during the Battle of Anchorage. Friendly fire that killed everyone on board, one of the worst Navy disasters since World War II. The Yus democracy surfaces in Far Harbor's lore. An American stealth submarine with an uncanny resemblance to Yangtze-class design, dry-docked at Mount Desert Island Naval Base for repairs. Captain Arnold Wabash sabotaged his own reactor rather than follow orders to deploy the vessel on a secret mission targeting Chinese operations in the South China Sea. The reactor leak forced the crew to evacuate, but before the war struck, Wabash disappeared with the submarine's launch key. Admiral Edward Grath considered it treason, believed the democracy could have disabled Chinese nuclear capability, potentially saved New York, Washington, or Boston. 2 American submarines, that's all the records mention. 2 vessels out of what should have been hundreds. Where are the rest? Where are the ballistic missile submarines, the hunter-killers, the nuclear-powered attack subs that prowled the oceans during the Cold War? If Vault-Tec could build 99 underground bunkers for their twisted experiments, if the Enclave could establish an oil rig in the Pacific Ocean 175 miles off the California coast as their continuation of government facility, then who's to say the Navy didn't have their own contingency plans? Who's to say they didn't build installations beneath the waves, self-sustaining habitats hidden from the bombs, protected by thousands of feet of water and pressure hulls designed to withstand the apocalypse? Think about the logic. NORAD had mountain bunkers. The Enclave had the oil rig in Raven Rock. Vault tech buried. Humanity underground. But the Navy? The Navy had submarines that could stay underwater for months at a time, nuclear reactors that could run for decades, desalination systems that turned seawater into drinking water, hydroponics for food production, everything you need to outlast the end of the world. And they had something else, the deepest, darkest, most inaccessible real estate on the planet, the ocean floor. I started mapping sonar anomalies along the continental shelf, using pre-war bathymetric data I recovered from a military terminal. Strange structures that don't match natural geology. Metal signatures that bloom on sonar like flowers in the deep. In the Atlantic, off the coast of the capital wasteland, there's a dead zone where salvagers don't return. Fishermen call it the Admiral's Grave, claim that something down there pulls boats under, that you can see lights in the water on moonless nights, like something is watching from below. If you're still with me after hearing this, hit that like and subscribe button. The Pacific holds even more mysteries. I've cross-referenced shipping manifests, naval deployment records, classified communications from the weeks before the Great War. The patterns are there if you know where to look. Submarine crews that reported to bases and then vanished from official records. Construction projects listed as deep-sea mining operations that consumed enough steel and concrete to build a small city. Budget allocations for underwater habitat research that disappeared into black project classifications. I found a memo from Admiral Grath, the same man who commanded Captain Wabash and the Democracy. It was dated March 12, 2077, 8 months before the bombs fell. The subject line read, Contingency Omega 7. Most of the document was corrupted, but I could make out fragments. Words like permanent deployment, self-sufficient operations, minimum surface contact, and one phrase that made my blood run cold, assume surface world loss. They knew. The Navy knew the nuclear exchange was coming, and they prepared for it. The enclave evacuated to the oil rig in the Pacific. The President and his cabinet, the shadow government that had been pulling strings for decades, they all retreated to that deep-sea drilling platform 175 miles off the California coast. They built it over the last accessible underwater oil deposit, turned it into a fortress with manufacturing facilities, research labs, and enough firepower to sink a tanker-sized vessel. They survived there for over 160 years, completely self-sufficient, plotting to retake the mainland. But the enclave was politicians and scientists, bureaucrats playing at military command. The Navy? The Navy was warriors, engineers, submariners, who spent months at a time in metal tubes beneath the ocean. If the enclave could establish a functional underwater base using a converted oil rig, what could the Navy accomplish with purpose-built facilities designed from the ground up for deep ocean survival? I've been building a picture from fragments, classified files, intercepted communications, engineering specifications. The pieces fit together like a nightmare jigsaw puzzle. The Navy didn't just have contingency plans for nuclear war, they had contingency plans for extinction, for total surface world loss, for a scenario where returning to land wasn't an option, where the only way to survive was to stay beneath the waves forever. Imagine it. Submarine pens carved into the continental shelf. Pressure hulls buried in the ocean floor like mechanical seeds waiting to sprout. Nuclear reactors providing power for decades, maybe centuries. Hydroponics growing food under artificial light. Desalination systems processing seawater into drinking water. Air recyclers filtering carbon dioxide. Genetic banks preserving seeds, embryos, the blueprint of life waiting for a world that might never be ready for them. All of it hidden beneath thousands of feet of water, protected from radiation, shielded from blast waves, invisible to satellites and aerial reconnaissance. The perfect shelter from the apocalypse. And if the Chinese Ghost Fleet could stay operational for 200 years, why not American installations? Captain Zhao survived in the Yangtze 31 for over 2 centuries, his nuclear reactor still functional, his life support still running. If one submarine could maintain power for that long, an entire underwater complex with redundant systems and dedicated maintenance crews could last indefinitely. The question isn't whether these bases exist. The question is, what happened to the people inside them? I found personnel records for something called the Deep Patrol Initiative. Submarine crews who volunteered for extended deployment missions. The selection criteria were specific: no family ties, high psychological stability scores, technical expertise in nuclear engineering or hydroponics or life support systems. They were looking for people who could handle isolation, who could survive in a closed environment for years at a time, who wouldn't crack under the pressure of knowing they might never see the surface again. The last roster I found was dated October 15th, 2077, 8 days before the Great War. 12 submarine crews, approximately 144 personnel total, reported to classified departure points along both coasts. After that, nothing. No communication, no deployment records, no indication they ever returned to port. 144 people vanished into the ocean a week before the world ended. Where did they go? What were their orders? Did they make it to their destination before the missiles launched? Did they survive the initial exchange? And if they did, what have they been doing for the past 200 years? I think about Captain Zhao sometimes, ghoulified and alone in his submarine, watching through the periscope as the world burned. He retained his sanity, held on to his humanity despite the radiation, despite the isolation, despite the guilt of what he'd done. But his crew, they went feral, turned into mindless ghouls that he couldn't bring himself to kill because they were still his family. Now multiply that scenario by 12 submarine crews. Imagine entire underwater installations where the radiation slowly transformed the inhabitants. Some might have retained their minds like Zhao. Others would have devolved into feral ghouls, turning their sanctuary into a tomb. And what about those who survived without ghoulification? What would 200 years of isolation do to the human mind? What kind of society would develop in the crushing darkness of the ocean floor? Would they remember they were American? Would they care? Or would they become something new, something adapted to life beneath the waves, as alien to surface dwellers as the Shi are different from their submarine origins? I've started examining salvaged naval equipment more carefully. Depth charges recovered from the ocean floor that show signs of recent detonation. Sonar buoys that still transmit encrypted signals on frequencies the military abandoned before the war. Nets made from pre-war polymers, the kind used for submarine camouflage, tangled around underwater structures that shouldn't exist in those locations. Something is still active down there. Something is still operating beneath the waves. In the capital wasteland, there are stories. A salvager named Marcus told me he was diving near the Potomac estuary when he saw lights in the deep water. Not the bioluminescence of mutated sea life, but artificial light, geometric patterns, the glow of working machinery. He tried to follow them deeper, but his suit couldn't handle the pressure. When he surfaced, his sonar equipment was dead, fried by some kind of electromagnetic pulse. He never went back. A trader in Rivet City mentioned submarines surfacing at night in the Chesapeake Bay. Brief sightings, vessels that appeared for minutes before diving again, leaving no trace except disturbed water and confused witnesses. The Brotherhood dismissed the reports as Mirelurk activity or radiation-induced hallucinations. But Mirelurks don't have running lights. Mirelurks don't surface in organized patterns. And then there's the children of Adam at the nucleus in Far Harbor. They worship the us democracy, call it the vessel. Treat it as a holy site because of the radiation leaking from its sabotaged reactor. But before they arrived, someone else was using that naval base. Dima, the synth, he discovered it first. He found something in the pre-war data files, Something about advanced combat armor shipments that never arrived, equipment that could still be buried somewhere if the sealants held. But why was a naval base ordering advanced combat armor in the final days before the war? Power armor wasn't standard submarine equipment. Unless they were preparing for something, unless they knew they'd need to defend their underwater installations against threats they couldn't predict. I found weapons caches marked on old naval charts, coordinates that point to locations on the continental shelf. Most of them have been looted or destroyed, but one site off the coast of Boston yielded something interesting. A weapons locker stamped with the insignia of Submarine Squadron 15, dated October 2077. Inside were plasma rifles, Gauss weapons, ammunition types that shouldn't exist. Experimental ordnance, the kind that never made it to production because the war ended before they could be deployed. Except someone deployed them anyway. Someone opened that weapons cache decades after the bombs fell, took what they needed, and sealed it again. The lock mechanism showed signs of recent use, lubricated with synthetic oil that doesn't degrade. Professional work, military discipline. If this story has kept you listening this far, and you want more of these dark confessions from the wasteland, hit that like button. It really motivates me to create similar Fallout lores. I'm not the only one asking questions. I met a Brotherhood scribe named Valdez who's been researching pre-war naval operations. She's convinced the Navy established at least 3 major underwater complexes, one in the Atlantic, one in the Pacific, and one in the Gulf of Mexico. She's mapped shipping routes, analyzed construction contracts, traced personnel transfers. Her evidence is circumstantial but compelling. According to her research, the facilities would have been modular, designed to expand over time as more submarines arrived. The initial construction would have used automated systems, remote-operated vehicles drilling into the sea floor, robots welding pressure hulls together in the darkness. By the time human crews arrived, the basic infrastructure would already be in place. They'd just have to move in and activate the life support systems. Valdez thinks the Pacific installation is the largest, possibly connected to the Enclave oil rig through underwater tunnels. It would explain how the Enclave maintained such a large vertibird fleet, how they manufactured advanced power armor, how they sustained their population for over a century. They weren't doing it all on the oil rig. They had support infrastructure beneath the ocean, factories and refineries and research labs that the Chosen One never discovered when he destroyed Control Station Enclave, which means those facilities are still down there, still operational, still waiting. The Atlantic installation would be smaller, focused on surveillance and strategic response. Think about the location off the coast of the capital wasteland, positioned to monitor the eastern seaboard close enough to deploy forces to Washington if needed. The Admiral's grave isn't just a salvager's superstition. It's a no-go zone because something military grade is protecting it. Something with active defenses and automated response systems. And the Gulf installation? That one's pure speculation, but it makes tactical sense. The Gulf of Mexico was a strategic resource zone before the war, oil platforms and shipping lanes and naval bases. A facility there could monitor traffic through the Panama Canal, maintain surveillance on South America, serve as a fallback position if both coasts were compromised. 3 installations, 3 submarine fleets, potentially hundreds of personnel who survived the apocalypse by going deeper instead of higher. But what are they doing now? What is their mission? Do they even remember they're supposed to be defending America, or have they evolved into something else entirely? I need to tell you something I haven't mentioned yet, something that changes everything I've been saying. My name isn't important, and I told you I was a salvager diving for scrap in Boston Harbor. That's true, but it's not the whole truth. I was looking for something specific when I found the Yangtze 31. I was following orders. You see, I'm not just a wasteland scavenger with a curious mind and too much time on my hands. I'm Navy, or I was Navy. Or maybe I still am, depending on how you define service, when the government you serve doesn't exist anymore. Let me back up. Let me tell you how this really started. 3 years ago, I was exploring a collapsed bunker near the coast, just another pre-war military installation that the bombs had half buried. I found a terminal in the communications room, one of the old models with a Robco operating system that somehow still had power. Most of the files were corrupted, but one directory caught my attention: Deep Patrol Status Reports. The last entry was dated October 30th, 2077, 7 days after the bombs fell. The message was brief, heavily encrypted, but I managed to crack it using a decryption key I'd scavenged from another military site. It said, Station 7 operational, all personnel accounted for, reactor stable, life support nominal, awaiting further orders. Long live the United States. Station 7. Not a submarine designation, not a surface base, a station, implying something fixed, something permanent. And the timestamp proved it survived the initial nuclear exchange. Whoever sent that message was alive and functional a week after the world ended. I started searching for more references to Station 7. It took months, following breadcrumbs through ruined bases and flooded archives, piecing together fragments of a puzzle that someone had gone to great lengths to keep hidden. I found personnel rosters with names redacted, supply manifests listing equipment but no destination, transfer orders that led nowhere. And then I found the map. It was in a safe at a naval intelligence office that had been underwater for 2 centuries. The map showed the Atlantic coast with 3 locations marked in red: 1 off Boston, 1 near the capital wasteland, 1 farther south near what used to be Norfolk. Each location had a designation: Station 7, Station 4, Station 9. The Boston location was marked with additional notation: Primary Research Facility, Specialized Personnel, High-Value Asset Protection. That's when I realized what I was looking at. Not just survival bunkers, not just military installations, research stations. The Navy had established underwater laboratories where they could continue their work regardless of what happened on the surface. Secret projects that were too valuable to lose, too dangerous to abandon, too important to trust to any facility that might be destroyed by nuclear fire. What kind of research requires that level of protection? What secrets were worth building installations on the ocean floor? I think I know. I think I've figured out what they were doing down there. The Enclave had their FEV experiments, trying to create a virus that would kill anyone who wasn't genetically pure. Vault Tech ran their twisted social experiments on unwilling subjects. West Tech developed power armor and biological weapons. But the Navy? The Navy had something else, something they kept hidden even from other branches of the military. I found references in classified documents to something called the Poseidon Initiative. Not Poseidon Energy, the company that built the oil rig. This was different, a naval research program with the same name, but completely separate operations. The files I recovered were fragmentary, but certain phrases stood out: deep environment adaptation, extended submersion protocols, genetic modification for aquatic survival. They were trying to change people. They were trying to create humans who could survive underwater indefinitely, who could live and work and fight in the crushing depths without needing submarines or pressure suits. Imagine soldiers who could breathe water, who could withstand the pressure of the deep ocean, who could operate in an environment where the enemy couldn't follow. It sounds like science fiction, like pre-war comic book nonsense, but this is the same government that created super mutants, that developed power armor, that built Liberty Prime. They had the technology, they had the motivation, and they had underwater research stations where they could conduct experiments far from oversight, far from ethics committees, far from anyone who might object. Station 7, the primary research facility off the coast of Boston, that's where the main work was happening. The other stations were support infrastructure, supply depots, personnel housing. But Station 7? That was the laboratory where they were rewriting human biology. And if that research continued after the bombs fell, if those scientists survived the apocalypse and kept working for 200 years, what would they have created by now? I've seen things in the water that don't make sense. Bodies recovered from the ocean floor that show signs of mutation, but not the kind caused by radiation. Gills where there should be lungs, webbed fingers, eyes adapted to see in total darkness. Most salvagers assume it's just another flavor of wasteland mutation, the ocean's version of ghouls or super mutants. But what if it's not random? What if it's intentional? What if Station 7 succeeded? Here's something to think about. Why would mutated sea creatures attack surface dwellers with such coordination? Mirelurks are aggressive, sure, but they hunt in organized patterns. They establish territories. They defend underwater structures that don't occur naturally. We call them animals, but animals don't build. Animals don't plan. Animals don't maintain pre-war machinery. Unless they're not animals. Unless they're something else wearing an animal's shape. I went back to the Yangtze 31 after my first visit. Captain Zhao was still there, still maintaining his vigil over his ghoulified crew. I asked him about the waters around Boston, about things he'd seen through his periscope during his 2 centuries of isolation. He went quiet for a long time, his ghoul eyes staring at nothing. Then he said something that still gives me nightmares. He said, "The ocean is not empty, American. I have seen lights in the deep places. I have heard sounds that are not whales, not submarines, not any natural thing. Sometimes I think the war did not end. I think it went somewhere else, somewhere we cannot follow." When I pressed him for details, he refused to say more. But I saw the fear in his eyes. The same fear I've felt when diving near those sonar anomalies, when my equipment picks up sounds that shouldn't exist. What if the war really didn't end? What if it just moved underwater, where the surface world couldn't see it? American installations versus Chinese submarines, fighting a cold conflict in the crushing darkness, each side mutating and adapting and evolving into something that barely remembers what it used to be. The Shi in San Francisco, they're the most advanced faction in the wasteland. They understand technology that makes the Brotherhood of Steel look like scavengers playing with toys they don't comprehend. The Emperor, their salvaged submarine computer, it didn't just guide them, it educated them. It transformed them from simple sailors into a technological civilization in less than 2 centuries. What if that wasn't salvage? What if the Shi Huangti was always meant to run aground in San Francisco? What if it was a siege ship designed to establish a beachhead on American soil, to build a Chinese colony disguised as wasteland survivors? The Shi don't just avoid wasteland politics. They're waiting, building strength, preparing for something. And if China had that kind of long-term planning, why wouldn't America do the same? Why wouldn't the Navy establish their own seed stations, their own sleeper colonies, their own agents waiting for the right moment to emerge and reclaim the surface world? I've been tracking ship movements, or what passes for ships in the wasteland. Rivet City in the capital wasteland, it's built from an aircraft carrier that somehow survived the bombs. The Pridwin, the Brotherhood's mobile base, it's a dirigible, but it operates like a naval vessel, complete with a ship's bell and naval terminology. In Point Lookout, there are boats that appear and disappear, traders who come from nowhere and return to places that don't exist on any map. What if they're all connected? What if there's a network of naval installations, surface and subsurface, that maintained communication throughout the past 2 centuries? Not the Enclave, not the Brotherhood, but something older, something that predates both. The original chain of command, still operational, still following protocols established before the Great War. I found a radio frequency buried in those deep patrol files. It's supposed to be a dead channel, something the military abandoned decades before the bombs. But when I tuned my Pip-Boy to that frequency on certain nights, when the atmospheric conditions are just right, I hear something. Voices, numbers, coordinates, all in code, all following pre-war naval communication protocols. Someone is still broadcasting. Someone is still maintaining the network. I tried to decrypt the transmissions, spent weeks analyzing the patterns. Most of it is beyond my ability to crack, but I managed to decipher one repeating message. It's a recall order, transmitted every 72 hours. All deep patrol units report to designated coordinates. Consolidation protocol active. Priority Alpha. Acknowledge receipt. Nobody acknowledges. The message just repeats over and over, a ghost calling to ghosts across the centuries. Or maybe not ghosts, maybe something worse. Think about what happens to people in isolation. Think about what 200 years of waiting does to the human mind. The people in those underwater stations, if they survived, what would they become? Would they still believe in the America they were sent to protect? Would they still follow orders from a government that ceased to exist before most of them were born? Or would they create their own society, their own rules, their own vision of what America should be? Would they look at the wasteland, at the factions fighting over scraps, at the chaos and violence and mutation, and decide that surface humanity failed? That the only pure survivors are those who stayed beneath the waves, who adapted, who became something new? I've been having dreams lately, dark dreams about pressure and water and drowning. In the dreams, I'm swimming deeper, following lights that pulse in patterns I almost recognize. I pass submarines resting on the ocean floor like the graves of metal whales. I see structures that shouldn't exist, domes and towers and tunnels carved into underwater mountains, and I see them. The inhabitants of the deep. They have faces I almost recognize, bodies that are almost human, eyes that glow with a light that isn't quite natural. They don't attack me in these dreams, they just watch, waiting, like they know I'm coming, like they've been expecting me. When I wake up, I taste salt water. My lungs feel heavy, like they're full of the ocean, and sometimes, just sometimes, I find my fingers webbing together before I fully regain consciousness, before my body remembers it's supposed to be human. I think Station 7 found me before I found it. I think when I opened those files, when I started searching for the underwater installations, I triggered something. An old protocol, maybe. A fail-safe designed to identify potential recruits, people who had the curiosity and the skills to find what was hidden. Or maybe I was always part of this. Maybe my parents weren't really scavengers from the Commonwealth. Maybe I was born in one of those stations and sent to the surface for reasons I don't understand. Maybe everything I think I know about myself is a lie implanted to keep me functional until the right moment. The map I found, the one showing the 3 stations, it had a 4th location marked in pencil. Someone had added it recently. The graphite still fresh enough to smudge. It was labeled, "You are here," but I found that map 200 miles from where I was standing. There's no way anyone could have known I'd be in that specific bunker on that specific day, unless they were watching, unless they could track me, unless I'm already connected to their network in ways I don't understand. I'm going down there. I'm building a submersible from salvaged parts, reinforced hull plating from pre-war submarines, a reactor I pulled from a crashed vertibird, life support systems I've been piecing together for months. It won't be pretty, and there's a good chance it'll implode before I reach the deep stations, but I have to know. I have to see what's waiting in the crushing darkness. Part of me wonders if I'll find answers down there. Part of me wonders if I'll find myself. And part of me, the part that tastes salt water in my dreams, the part that feels most alive when I'm diving in the harbor, that part already knows the truth. I'm not searching for the underwater installations. I'm going home. What would you do if you discovered you weren't who you thought you were? If everything you believed about your origins was preparation for something else? Would you fight it, or would you embrace what you're becoming? I'll know soon enough. The submersible is almost ready. Another week, maybe 2, and I'll descend into the Admiral's grave. I'll find Station 7, or it'll find me. Either way, this confession will be the last record of who I was before I learned what I am. The ocean keeps its secrets well. But every secret wants to be known eventually. Every truth, no matter how deep it's buried, eventually rises to the surface. I just hope the surface world is ready for what's coming up from the deep. The submersible descended through layers of darkness, darkness, each one heavier than the last. At 50 feet, the sunlight turned green and murky. At 100 feet, it faded to a dim twilight. At 200 feet, I switched on the external lights and watched them cut weak tunnels through water so thick it felt like falling through black honey. The pressure hull creaked around me, not the tortured groaning of metal about to fail, but the settling sounds of a structure adapting to its environment. I'd built her well, reinforced every weld, triple-checked every seal. But there's always that moment of doubt when you're alone in the dark, when you realize how much water is pressing down on you, when you understand that one small failure means instant death. The sonar pinged steadily, painting the world in sound since sight was useless down here. I was following the coordinates from that penciled notation on the map, heading for a point 300 feet below the surface, nestled in an underwater canyon that didn't appear on any pre-war charts. At 250 feet, my radiation counter started clicking. Nothing dangerous yet, just background noise, the kind you'd expect from a nuclear reactor operating nearby. But the clicking grew faster as I descended, which meant I was getting close to something that had been generating power for a very long time. At 290 feet, the sonar picked up a structure. It was massive. The display showed walls extending beyond the range of my equipment, geometric precision that couldn't be natural. I adjusted my heading, angling the submersible toward what looked like an entrance. A dark rectangle cut into the canyon wall. My hands were shaking on the controls, but I couldn't tell if it was fear or excitement. The entrance was guarded, not by people, but by automated defense systems that should have been obsolete 2 centuries ago. I watched through the viewport as gun emplacements tracked my approach, targeting lasers, painting my hull with red dots. But they didn't fire. Instead, a light blinked on my communication panel. Someone, something, was hailing me. I opened the channel and heard static, then a voice. Male, calm, with the precise diction of someone reading from a script they'd memorized long ago. Unidentified vessel. You are approaching a restricted military installation. Transmit identification codes or turn back immediately. This is your only warning. My throat was dry. I keyed the transmitter and said, "This is civilian salvager. I don't have identification codes. I'm searching for Station 7. I found records indicating this location." Silence. The targeting lasers didn't waver, but the guns didn't fire either. I waited, counting heartbeats, wondering if I just signed my death warrant by admitting I knew about the station. Then the voice returned, but this time it sounded different, less scripted, more human. "You found the deep patrol files, you decrypted the messages, you built a submersible capable of reaching this depth. That demonstrates initiative, technical competence, and security clearance level that should not exist in a civilian." I didn't know how to respond to that, so I told the truth. I think I'm not civilian. I think I'm something else. I just don't remember what. Another long pause. "Then deploy your docking collar to the marked position. You are cleared to enter Station 7. Welcome home, Lieutenant. Lieutenant." The word hit me like a physical blow. I'd never been called that before, never held military rank that I knew of. But when I heard it, something in my chest loosened, like a lock opening after centuries of being sealed. The guns retracted. A section of the installation wall slid open, revealing a pressurized docking bay lit by harsh white lights. I guided the submersible into position, felt the collar engage with a metallic clunk, heard air hissing as the pressure equalized. The hatch unsealed with a sound like a sigh. I climbed out into a chamber that looked like it belonged in a pre-war military base, clean and functional and utterly impossible. Everything worked. The lights hummed with steady power, the air tasted filtered and fresh. The floor was clean enough to eat off. This wasn't a ruin. This was an active installation. A man was waiting for me. He wore a naval uniform that looked like it had been pressed that morning, perfectly creased, with rank insignia I recognized from old military manuals. Commander. His face was weathered but not old, lined with the stress of command rather than age. When he looked at me, his eyes held recognition. "You don't remember, do you?" he said. It wasn't a question. I shook my head. I remember salvaging. I remember growing up in the Commonwealth. I remember finding the files about deep patrol. "Memory wipe is part of the protocol," he said. "Surface agents need to believe they're civilians. It makes the cover more convincing. But triggers are embedded in your subconscious. When you found those files, when you started asking the right questions, the memory started coming back. That's why you're here." "What am I?" I asked. "What is this place?" He smiled, but it was sad. "Walk with me. I'll show you what we've become." Station 7 was everything I'd imagined and nothing I'd expected. The facility extended deep into the ocean floor, level after level of pressurized chambers connected by corridors that hummed with life. I saw laboratories where scientists worked on experiments I couldn't begin to understand. I saw hydroponic farms growing food under artificial sunlight. I saw training facilities where people practiced combat techniques designed for underwater environments. I saw children playing in a common area, normal human children who'd never seen the sky. "We were supposed to be a contingency," the commander explained as we walked. "If the surface world was destroyed, we'd preserve American military capability down here. Keep the chain of command intact. Wait for the right moment to emerge and rebuild." "How many stations are there?" I asked. 12 originally. 7 on the Atlantic coast, 5 on the Pacific. Station 7 is the research facility. Station 4 handles military operations. Station 9 is agricultural and life support research. The others have specialized functions. We maintained contact for the first 50 years after the bombs fell. "Maintained?" I caught the past tense. His expression darkened. Station 3 went dark in 2130. Reactor failure, we think. Station 8 reported contact with something hostile in 2145, then stopped transmitting. Over the decades, we lost contact with all but 4 stations, 7, 4, 9, and 12. The others are either destroyed or have chosen isolation. We stopped at a window that looked out into the ocean. I could see lights in the distance, other structures connected to Station 7 by illuminated tunnels. Schools of fish swam past, normal fish, untouched by radiation or mutation. This deep, the ocean was still clean. "The research," I said. "The genetic modifications." "What did you create?" "You," he said simply. "And people like you. Humans who can survive in both environments, surface and sea. We call it the Poseidon adaptation. Enhanced lung capacity for extended breath holding, improved pressure tolerance, night vision, temperature regulation for cold water. Nothing too obvious, nothing that would mark you as different, but enough to give you an edge when operating in aquatic environments." I looked at my hands, seeing them differently now. The webbing in my dreams, recessive trait. It only manifests in deep sleep, when your subconscious relaxes control. We designed it that way deliberately. You needed to pass as fully human on the surface. Why? The question came out harder than I intended. Why send people like me to the surface? Why not stay hidden down here? The commander was quiet for a long moment. Then he said, "Because we're dying. Slowly, yes. We have centuries left, maybe, but the genetic diversity isn't sufficient for long-term survival. We need surface contact. We need to integrate with wasteland populations. We need to ensure that when we finally emerge, we're not so alien that humanity rejects us." He led me to a conference room where a holographic display showed the continental shelf. Dozens of markers glowed in the water, far more than the 12 official stations. "This is what the Navy really built," he said. "Not 12 installations, 12 command centers, but hundreds of smaller outposts, supply depots, research substations, a complete underwater civilization. We've been growing, expanding, building for 2 centuries while the surface world tore itself apart. And the Shi, I asked? The Chinese submarine crews? They're doing the same thing. The Ghost Fleet wasn't just attack submarines. They had their own underwater stations, their own expansion plans. We've encountered them. Sometimes we fight. More often we avoid each other. The war doesn't matter anymore. What matters is survival. If this confession meant something to you, leave a like. It's the only way I know you liked the video. He brought up another display, this one showing population graphs, growth projections, resource calculations. In 50 years, we'll have enough people to establish permanent surface colonies. In a century, we'll be ready to reveal ourselves, but we need the surface world to be stable enough to accept us. That's where agents like you come in. You live on the surface, you integrate with wasteland society, you prepare the way for contact. I don't remember any of this, I said. I don't remember being recruited, being trained, being sent to the surface. You were born here, he said quietly. 28 years ago, in the medical bay on level 6. Your parents were both Navy, both scientists working on the Poseidon project. When you were 18, you volunteered for surface operations. We trained you for 2 years, implanted the cover memories, and deployed you to the Commonwealth. You've been gathering intelligence for the past 8 years. You just didn't know it. He pulled up a file on the terminal. My file. I saw photographs of myself at different ages, always in the station, always in naval uniform. I saw training records, psychological evaluations, mission reports transmitted on that encrypted frequency I'd discovered. Everything I thought I'd learned on my own was actually information I'd been programmed to find. The triggers worked perfectly, the commander said. You found the Yangtze 31 because we wanted you to establish contact with Captain Zhao. You researched the Ghost Fleet because we needed updated intelligence on Chinese operations. You built the submersible because it was time for you to come home and receive your next assignment. I felt sick. My entire life was a lie. Every choice I thought I'd made freely was actually following a script written before I was born. What's the next assignment? I asked, my voice hollow. Integration, he said. We're accelerating the timeline. The surface world is more dangerous than we anticipated. The Institute, the Brotherhood, the Enclave remnants, they all have technologies we need to monitor. We're deploying 50 more agents over the next year. You'll help train them. Teach them how to survive on the surface, how to maintain their cover, how to gather intelligence without being detected. And if I refuse? His expression was sympathetic but firm. Then you stay here. We can't risk exposure. You know too much now. You either serve the mission or you remain in Station 7 for the rest of your life. I looked out at the ocean again, at the lights of the underwater city we'd built in the crushing darkness. I thought about the surface world, about the wasteland I thought was my home. I thought about Captain Zhao, ghoulified and alone, waiting for 2 centuries to return to a country that didn't exist anymore. We were the same, he and I, both of us following orders from ghosts, both of us serving nations that had ceased to exist, both of us trapped between 2 worlds belonging to neither. I'll do it, I said. I'll train the new agents. But on one condition, name it. When we finally make contact with the surface, when we reveal ourselves, we do it as equals, not as conquerors, not as liberators. We don't tell them we're here to save them from themselves. We offer cooperation, partnership, a chance to build something new together. The commander studied me for a long moment. Then he extended his hand. Deal. Welcome back to active duty, Lieutenant. I shook his hand, sealing my fate. They gave me quarters on level 8, a small but comfortable room with a viewport looking out into the ocean. I spent that first night watching fish swim past, thinking about everything I'd learned. My memories were starting to come back, fragments of my real childhood surfacing through the cover story. I remembered my mother teaching me about hydroponics, My father explaining reactor maintenance, friends I'd grown up with who were now scattered across the surface world, living lives just like mine. The next morning, I started training the new recruits. Young people, most of them volunteers, all of them eager to see the surface world. I taught them how to scavenge, how to fight, how to blend in with wasteland communities. I taught them the triggers to watch for, the signs that their cover was compromised. I taught them to be human when they needed to be, and something more when circumstances demanded it. And at night, I broadcast messages on that encrypted frequency, maintaining the network that connected our agents across the wasteland. Slowly, carefully, we were weaving ourselves into the fabric of surface society, preparing for the day when we could emerge from the ocean and take our place in the world above. The Admiral's grave wasn't a graveyard, it was a nursery, and we were the children of the deep, waiting to be born into the light. Sometimes I dream about that moment, about the day we finally surface. I dream about submarines rising from the ocean like steel leviathans. I dream about underwater cities flooding their ballast tanks and ascending to join the world above. I dream about revealing the truth to the wasteland, that while they fought over scraps, we built a civilization beneath the waves. That while they mutated and adapted to survive on land, we mutated and adapted to survive in the sea. That humanity didn't just endure the apocalypse, it transcended it. But I also dream about Captain Zhao, and I wonder if we're making the same mistake he did. Following orders that should have ended 2 centuries ago, serving a nation that exists only in our memories and our pride, preparing to impose our vision of America on a world that's moved beyond nations and flags and the old ways that led to nuclear fire. Maybe the surface world doesn't need us. Maybe they're better off without another faction claiming to know the right way forward. Maybe the kindest thing we could do is stay beneath the waves and let them build their own future. But orders are orders. The mission continues. And I'm Navy through and through, even if the Navy I serve exists only in the crushing darkness of the ocean floor. Station 7 operational, all personnel accounted for, reactor stable, life support nominal, awaiting further orders. Long live the United States, or whatever we're becoming in the deep.